We are very pleased tonight to have on set Julie McGoff. Julie is an HR professional, and she has her own company, Next Step HR Strategies, which is a consulting company for HR.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. So today we're going to talk about a lot about HR, but mostly about harassment. But before we talk about harassment, because it's so prevalent in the news today, let's talk about what an HR function is in any company, whether you have 2 employees or 2,000 employees.
Right. So essentially, an HR presence is, their role is to sort of be a liaison between the company and the employee.
Okay. So they're really HRs for both. It's to protect the employees and it's to protect the company.
Absolutely.
And an HR department would do things like benefits.
Employee benefits.
Which would include
long-term disability, short-term disability, health, dental, vision,
medical,
employee assistance programs.
Yep, if they're offered. Yep. Employee manuals or employee
handbooks.
Handbooks, right?
Yes. Policies, procedures.
Right, which change based on rules and laws also.
Absolutely.
Correct, like sick leave and pregnancy leave and family leave.
That's correct.
When the laws change, even no matter how big your company is, you kind of have to be aware of the fact that that might affect you and how you're
absolutely
working with your employees.
Yes.
Okay. Performance management, right?
Definitely. That's something that should be done on an annual basis, where employees are given feedback in terms of how they're doing, how they're performing.
Right. And they have objectives, and have they met their objectives?
Measurable goals.
Measurable goals, right. Recruiting, so HR is used for, if you have to hire a whole bunch of people, it's used for recruiting, it's used for hiring, it's used for terminating.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So an HR function is very important in any organization, especially today with the subject of harassment.
That's correct.
Now, harassment is defined as aggressive, pressure, or intimidation. And harassment doesn't necessarily just have to be sexual harassment.
Right.
It can be any kind of harassment. Give me some
any
examples.
form of intimidation, swearing, conflict in the workplace, anything that just is unwelcome or intimidating.
Right.
Uncomfortable.
And sometimes employees that have worked together a long time, they tend to have a friendly banter. There tends to be kind of a groove in every different organization where you have a different way of handling things. And unless an employee says, that bothers me, the company might not know that that someone is actually harassing another person within the organization. Is that true?
Yes. So, to your point earlier when we were speaking, if you call somebody, honey, right?
Yep.
It's fine until someone says it's not. Right.
Until they say, I don't like you calling me honey.
Right. And then and I think it's important for the employees to have a voice as well.
Right. Exactly. Now, what about how do you set the standards, though, for what is harassment like? Can I say, well, I've worked here longer, so I'm going to take all the really good shifts this week, and somebody else has to have the bad shifts?
Well,
is that harassment?
That's really up to management to decide, how the shifts get distributed and scheduling, how schedulings, are provided and done. So,
yep.
I don't think that there would be that kind of, freedom to make those.
Okay. Telling jokes that are like off color, or they have to do with your lineage, all those things could be considered harassment.
Absolutely, and unprofessional. Right?
If the person doesn't like them.
There should be a standard. There should be a standard that's upheld throughout the organization.
Right.
Right?
Now,
that's your culture.
What if your boss is the one that's like not following the proper procedures of harassment? What do you do?
Yeah, that would be an appropriate time to bring HR into the know. Absolutely.
What if your boss is HR?
Well, HR will typically have a boss as well, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you as an employee can always go to outside sources also. The state of Massachusetts, I know, has an employment protection agency.
Yes.
If you need to file a complaint or you don't know where to go, there's other resources that you can use.
There are other resources available, but you should definitely start within your organization.
Right. Whenever possible. Okay. So let's talk about sexual harassment and harassment awareness. What is harassment awareness training?
So essentially, employees don't show up necessarily on the job site, trained, and they don't necessarily understand the difference between what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior in the workplace, right?
Right.
So when you train them, you give them specific examples, and then there's sort of a protocol to follow.
Right. So they have to understand that you've defined a policy of this is harassment, and this is not going to be put up with. and people have to sign off that they've heard it and they agree it.
Right.
with
It's
it.
a good idea to distribute those policies on an annual basis. I think it's a very proactive approach in this environment to, bring somebody in from the outside to conduct these types of training, unless you have, HR training within your own organizations in existence.
Right.
But yes, distribute those policies on an annual basis, and then have, folks acknowledge that they attended the training as
Right.
well. Yeah.
Now, a lot of companies don't have, they're not big enough to have their own HR department. So it's professionals like you that own companies that kind of consult. So you'd go into a company and you'd take a look at their policies and their procedures and how they're handling harassment training, and you'd give them advice on how to do it.
Right, and we would make recommendations. We would typically, schedule 2 trainings, one for management and supervisors,
Yep.
and another for the employees.
And what is the danger if a company doesn't do harassment training?
Again, just because you can't assume that folks know what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, right? So I just think it's a very proactive approach to mitigate risk.
Okay. Because of all the things that have been in the news lately about sexual harassment, and the really horrific stories that we've heard about, like in Hollywood, about people having to do
Quid pro quo.
quid pro quo, right. You do something for me sexually and you'll get a party, you'll get an advancement. That's obviously an extreme.
Right.
But does that happen in every company otherwise? I mean, is there less extreme?
No, I mean, I've definitely, you see the there's definitely, a wide array of exposure and experiences from organizations, and it varies. But I think the common theme is that, there needs to be a no tolerance policy for anything of that nature.
Right,
It
absolutely none.
Absolutely none.
Right. Okay. The tolerance is absolutely zero. So, final advice that you would give to both employees and employers about harassment?
I think it's very important for the employees to have a voice, and to be empowered to say and to speak up for themselves, and that is something that I would certainly encourage. Depending on the nature of the allegation.
Right, right.
I mean, if it's something as you're calling me honey and
Yeah.
I don't like it. I mean, I would encourage you to say that. I mean,
Right.
and whether it's a male or a female,
Right.
I mean, you should be
Be able to speak
empowered
up.
to speak
Right,
up.
right.
Absolutely.
And employers should just be aware that this is a subject that they need to be constantly aware of. That
Correct.
you can't just, this doesn't not exist. This does exist. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter how many people you have. Harassment exists, and it's an important subject, and it's a very serious subject.
It's a very serious subject, right? I mean, your employees are your people are your greatest asset, right?
Right.
And you want to foster and develop and promote and encourage an environment that's free from that.
Right.
It's professional
And safe.
and safe
And honest.
and
Yep.
honest and
And open.
right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
That's
so
very
much.
good
Thanks
advice.
for having me.